think right now it's time to move into our evening program. And Terry, Terry Wiggins is the one who came up with this suggestion for our evening's discussion. And so about green burials and how we can be ecologically sound even beyond the grave. So this is of interest to every one of us, because that's one thing we can't avoid. And so Terry, would you take it from here and to please introduce your partner in this presentation tonight?
Okay, I'm Terry Wiggins, and a member of 350 and involved in a bunch of other things related to climate. And my partner is Katie Heinen, and I'll let her introduce herself.
And I'm Katie Heinen, and I got to know Terry through the Interfaith Earth Network, which we were both members of. And yeah, we developed this program, and you'll find out why during the course of the program. So we are here to talk about the issues with our current burial practices and suggest some better alternatives in natural burial practices.
So let's see, let me share my screen. Okay. And the question in our subtitle is, can we do good when we're dead? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, we can do good when we're dead. And that's what I like about this subject, that it's something that you can do something about. So much of what's environmentally wrong with our practices in life, we can't do anything about as individuals. So I hope this helps you feel empowered.
So I'm going to give you a second to read this.
Oh, and I see our.
So this is a subject that's often difficult to talk about. So we're going to tell you about some various practices so that you can become familiar with the language and have this conversation with your loved ones or those who might have to take care of your final arrangements when you die.
So this is a funeral director telling a woman who's looking at a casket saying, and of course it comes with a lifetime warranty. But we're telling you tonight that it's time to think outside the box.
So even if you are committed already to a family plot, there are still choices that you can make as long as you are still living. So the first thing we should say is we're not experts in this topic. And in fact, Terry and I continue to try to find resources and read up and keep up on what's going on, but some of the changes happen even faster than we can keep up with. For example, I just learned about one you'll hear about a little bit later. We first became interested in this topic when our friend Carol Waskovich, who was one of the founders of the Interfaith Earth Network, which we were both members of, died, and she was buried in September of 2014. She had a green burial, and that was the first experience I had had, and I believe Terry also, with the concept of a natural or green burial. So she's doing a lot of good, even though she has passed, as she did good while she was alive. And so she's inspired us to carry on the message of natural burial and the impact it can have on our environment. So the picture in this is the place where Carol is buried. It is the natural burial of Prairie Home Cemetery.
In Waukesha.
Yeah, yeah. So many people are trying to live their lives in a greener, more sustainable way. And now they're exploring options for leaving a more sustainable legacy in our burial choices. As I said before, Carol's natural burial prompted us to learn more about the options and share them with others. So we have been doing this for some time. The first thing we did was have an interfaith gathering where leaders of different faith groups talked about the way they care for and bury their dead. And we also do a lot of tabling for the Interfaith Earth Network at various Earth events, sharing the information with people that way.
Okay. And here's some potato funeral planning. with their cremation options. But we're not potatoes. And the issue of how to treat human remains is a very sensitive one, with as many traditions as there are cultures. And we have great respect for all those who go through this process. Conversations around this topic have often led to two conclusions about what to do with the deceased, either traditional burial or cremation. However, there are several alternatives that have been emerging over the last few years. Switch this there.
So we'll be using the terms green or natural burial interchangeably during our presentation. But before we get much deeper into that presentation, we want to define what we mean. So a green or natural burial is the burial of a body without any embalming in a container, shroud, or no container at all, directly into the ground without the use of a concrete vault or liner. The emphasis of the green burial is to care for the dead with minimal impact to the environment. So it conserves natural resources. It reduces carbon emissions, which I know is important to this group in particular. It protects worker health. And it restores or preserves habitat.
By the way, the picture is from the Prairie Rest section of Forest Home Cemetery, their natural burial area. The name of those buried are inscribed on the rock, if they wish. As of summer, when I attended the funeral of Bill Sell, whom I know some of you knew, I think there were 2 stones, both full of names. Quite cool.
So what's the matter with our current burial practices? There are issues with embalming, with caskets and concrete burial vaults, with land use, with the maintenance of cemeteries, and there are issues with cremation. So we're going to talk about each of these in detail and explain why we really need alternatives.
There are issues with embalming because chemicals like formaldehyde are used to preserve bodies. This practice dates to ancient Egypt, and it caught on in the US during the Civil War to transport fallen soldiers home. You've probably all seen pictures of Abraham Lincoln being carried in a wagon so people could see him. The ancient Egyptians, we should note, probably did not use the poisonous chemicals that we use today. Katie?
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm sure that some of you have heard the joke about how they dug up Beethoven's grave recently and found him furiously erasing all of his compositions from the 9th Symphony back down to the 1st Symphony.
What was he doing?
I asked him, he was decomposing, of course.
Uh-huh.
So obviously embalming does not prevent the body from decomposing.
Yeah. And 1 million people are embalmed in the US every year, and 3 to 4 gallons of chemicals are used to preserve the average body. 1 million times 3 to 4, yikes, that's about 5 or 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools full, just in the US. And embalming fluid can and does leak into the soil and thus groundwater, potentially at hazardous concentrations. The formaldehyde doesn't bother the dead body, but it's toxic to the people who do the embalming, putting them at 8 times higher risk for leukemia and 3 times higher risk for ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease compared to the general population. I sure don't want to be poisoning people so I can look good for a few hours. You know, embalming is not a legal requirement.
Now there is organic embalming that is coming. That's what the Egyptians did. It's without the toxic chemicals and is available now, but we don't know and haven't been able to find out yet how widely available it is. Uses essential oils and some natural herbs and things. So hopefully that might be a possibility in the future. So there are also issues with caskets. So the use of caskets and vaults pose their own set of problems. An article in Popular Science details the board feet and tons of resources. So if you were to look that up, we won't give you all those exact figures, but they're pretty amazing. So again, we're using all those natural resources and burying them never to be used again. And then we bury people in concrete or steel vaults that the casket goes into. The production of these both are large greenhouse gas emitters, including the sourcing of the materials, the processing and the manufacturing and the transport of those materials. So another problem with caskets and vaults is that there is no return of bodily fluids like potassium and calcium to the ground where they can actually do some good. And instead, what happens is a lack of oxygen in the decomposing body causes a release of methane. So instead of being able to have our bodies help the environment, we release the methane and it hurts it even more. So also it's important to note, because some people are concerned about this, embalming fluid can leak into the soil, but also concrete caskets and concrete containers, vaults, and grave liners do not protect the body from animals, insects, grave robbers, and the elements. The fact is, animals just aren't that interested in, we're not that delicious. They are not going to be digging up bodies.
Even though the usual depth of a natural burial is about 3.5 or 4 feet, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, I can actually read you the response to that question, but we'll save that for later if somebody is interested.
Okay. And then there's the issue of land use. So many cemeteries all over the country and all over the world using up so much land in perpetuity. This was my original motivation for choosing cremation, which was my choice before I learned about natural burial options. And cities are running out of space for cemeteries. And of course, all those grave markers use resources too. Trevor Noah, host of The Daily Show, had a segment on green burials, and he opens it with supply chain issues and the shortage of headstone materials during the worst of the pandemic. It's very funny segment. And I should say that no state requires burial inside a vault. These regulations come from the cemeteries themselves for the purpose of preventing the soil from settling, so it is easier to mow. Small engines, like you see in the picture, are large greenhouse gas emitters. In addition, the cemeteries put various pesticides on the lawns to keep out the weeds, to make them grow so they can be cut down with the small engines, and so they'll grow some more. And of course, those pesticides and herbicides keep the pollinators, that is the bees and butterflies, from living on that area of sterile land. We note that the sacred space has become a toxic landfill.
So let's talk about flame cremation, because many of us have chosen that as a better option. And I put better in quotes. And in fact, it's only about 10% greener than our traditional burial practices. And here's why. Since 2015, cremation using fire has been the most popular death care practice in the United States. Amid the pandemic, local air quality regulators repeatedly lifted cremation limits to allow for coping with the backlog of dead. In many countries, cremation has become the death care option of choice for most people, and many believe erroneously that cremation is more environmentally friendly than conventional burial. But as cremation becomes more commonplace, concerns about its effects on the environment and climate have been mounting. So the pros around cremation are that it may be lighter on chemicals because you're not embalming the person necessarily, but it might be. It does use up less space. It might not require watering and mowing, although many choose to have their ashes buried in a family plot, so it still would involve all of that. But the negatives, and Terry, these are the big buts.
And these are big butts. It requires about 3 hours of burning at very high temperatures using about 28 gallons of fossil fuel per body. So it has a very high carbon footprint with about 600 pounds of CO2 per body. And there are high toxic emissions from the burning process and from what was in the body. Cremation is the third highest emitter of mercury into the atmosphere. And crematories often operate in frontline or environmental justice communities. And here are some pictures of the process and its results. Somebody's sliding a crate that has a body in it into the fire, and someone pushing the fire around, and the results from different cremations.
So if you've lived your whole life trying to reduce your carbon footprint, knowing what is and isn't legal or required is really important. So there can be state and local regulations, cemetery regulations, and simply cultural or local traditions. And many of these may be religious traditions. Myths and assumptions abound death care, especially in this country, abound. The Federal Trade Commission's funeral rule makes it possible for you to choose only those goods and services you want or need, and to pay only for those you select, whether you're making arrangements when a death occurs or making them in advance. The rule allows you to compare prices among funeral homes and makes it possible for you to select the funeral arrangements you want at the home that you use. The rule does not apply to third-party sellers such as casket or monument dealers, or to cemeteries that lack an on-site funeral home. And I know this from personal experience from going in with family members, and they kind of give you a package deal, right? And you assume you have to take the whole package, and that is not the case. Consider this: the purchase of standard funeral goods has often been highly motivated by the sentiment that the more we spend, the more we demonstrate our love for the deceased. Many people, more and more people, are rejecting this idea and choosing to purchase items that reflect their basic values in living and dying sustainably.
So what are the alternatives in some states? Not everything is available everywhere. There's green or natural burial. The Green Burial Council certifies different types of cemeteries. There are various alternatives for cremated remains. They can be turned into trees or diamonds, and they can be incorporated into wreath balls. And there's water cremation or alkaline hydrolysis, also called aquamation, biocremation, and resumation. And then there's natural organic reduction, which is human composting. And we'll talk, and not to leave out one more, the infinity burial suit, also called the mushroom suit. We'll talk about each of these options in turn.
So one of the first options you would have, even if you have a family plot and not in a natural burial area, you still have a choice about your casket and your casket material. So caskets can be made out of willow, seagrass, bamboo, cardboard, pine. And recently I saw an article that said they're even making caskets out of recycled paper. Here are some examples of shrouds. And this might be either a natural burial ground or a conservation burial ground. Now there are, as Terry mentioned before, there are several types of cemeteries. So there's the traditional one, then there's the hybrid cemetery, which has the traditional burial area and the natural burial area. We have two of these in this area. One is Forest Home in Milwaukee County, and the other one is Prairie Rest in Waukesha County. Natural burial sanctuaries, such as this picture demonstrates. We have several in Wisconsin. The one we are most familiar with is the one started by Shed Farley on their family's land, and it is a natural burial sanctuary, nature sanctuary, where you can put out a plot and have the grave will be hand dug, and then you get GPS coordinates so that you know where your loved one is buried.
And that's in Verona, right?
Right.
Okay, good. And this is really the kind of place where I prefer to be buried, a forest with sunshine, but I'd really prefer an evergreen forest.
And it helps preserve the land forever because you can't develop land that's been used as a cemetery.
Right.
So another plus. These are examples of reef balls or memorial reefs. What they are is ashes mixed with cement and then dropped into the ocean. If you dive, you can visit them, and purportedly fish enjoy them as habitat. You can even have a destination funeral for dedication and placement of the reef ball. But of course, that's going to mean more greenhouse gas emissions.
So we come back to our potatoes. Unfortunately, when we're talking about alternative burial methods, there just aren't as many options for cremating people as there are for cooking potatoes. But here's one example. This picture is of the simple wooden casket of the anti-apartheid leader, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, being carried out of St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, South Africa. The Archbishop, who died last year, had requested that his funeral not be ostentatious and that his body not be cremated by flame. Instead, Tutu requested aquamation, or alkaline hydrolysis, a water-based process that is considered an eco-friendly alternative to traditional cremation.
So what is water cremation? Alkaline hydrolysis uses techniques to decompose a body in the same way that it naturally would decompose after burial. This process is sped up dramatically using alkaline chemicals, water, heat, and sometimes pressure, which in turn accelerates the body's natural decomposition. And once the process is complete, no tissue or DNA are in the liquid. The only remains in the chamber are bones and the sterile liquid solution and any artificial parts. The bones can then be pulverized and returned to the family, but you might need a bigger urn because they produce more than your traditional cremation. Water cremation has been proposed for legalization in Wisconsin, but has been objected to by various religious groups. Some think it's disrespectful to have the liquid go into the municipal waste system. But I raise the question here, if in regular embalming, you drain the blood and liquid out of the body and that goes into the drain system as well. So I'm not sure where they see the difference.
Yeah. Who knows? And then there's human composting, also known as natural organic reduction by the company that sells it. The cycle begins by the beneficial microbes that occur naturally on our bodies and in the environment. The body is put in a cylinder surrounded by wood chips, alfalfa, and straw. Oops. Come on. The cradle is then placed into a vessel and covered in more plant material. This is the vessel, kind of a beehive-like structure that these round cylinders go in. The body and plant material remain in the vessel for about 30 days, and microbes break everything down on the molecular level, resulting in the formation of a nutrient-dense soil. Each body creates about 1 cubic yard of soil amendment from the body and all the additions to it for the composting process. And once completed, it can be used to enrich conservation land, forests, or gardens with flowers, shrubs, and trees, but not vegetables. We don't eat human compost, apparently. It's there's life after death. The soil created returns the nutrients from our bodies to the natural world, and it can restore forests, sequester carbon, and nourish new life.
Essentially, Terry, isn't this the same as what would happen if you just buried the body? It just speeds.
Yeah,
up.
it's just speeded up. Yeah, it is the same. Very much the same. You just have to pay somebody to do it. And this is the mushroom suit called the infinity burial suit. I have a friend who thinks that this is absolutely the best way to go out. Personally, I think it looks scary. For all we do, hey, we got to think about the reactions and wishes of survivors like our grandkids. What are they going to think when they see this? Body fully covered by this black suit. And what this suit does is it supposedly, and I say supposedly because I read an article that indicated it didn't work, is that it cleanses the body and soil of toxins that would otherwise seep into the environment, and it delivers nutrients from the body to the surrounding plant roots efficiently and restarts life around the body faster than normal. And it's made, of course, by a California company. So why choose natural burial?
Okay, so first, it conserves natural resources, all the metals and the concrete that go into making the casket and the vault. Secondly, it reduces carbon emissions, those greenhouse gases that cause global warming. Also, it protects workers' health by protecting them from exposure to toxic chemicals. It restores or preserves habitat, whether by composting or conservation cemeteries keeping habitat intact. And an important one to this group in particular, but all of us, it reduces the impact of death practices on climate change, either by reducing emissions from cremation or the creation of materials to be buried. There's a really good article called Death Has a Climate Change Problem, which is in our resources. And not to be overlooked, the cost is usually less because you can forego a lot of the trappings of the practices that have become standard.
So what's our conclusion in terms of the greenest burial, the one that uses up the least CO2? That would be natural burial, though it uses up more space than human composting or water cremation. Human composting is next, but it's only available in 5 states, not including Wisconsin. Water cremation comes in third, and it's legal in Illinois and I believe in Minnesota and about 20 other states. Flame cremation is next, and casket and vault burial clearly takes the prize for using the most CO2.
So the green burial process falls on a spectrum and can include a wide range of options and choices, with the fewer materials and energy consuming practices obviously being the greenest. But even if one has arrangements already made, know that you still have some of these options. If a greener burial feels like the right choice for you, let it be known and make a plan. And I'm going to do a little pitch here. if any of you happen to be Catholic, which I am, I have not been able to find a Catholic cemetery in our area that has natural burial areas. In other parts of the country, the Catholics are actually leading the way in terms of natural burial, and certainly their theology is very strongly in support of it. So I would love to see an initiative to encourage the Catholic cemeteries in this area to allow for natural burial and create those areas within their cemeteries. So if anybody is interested in joining me in that push, I would be happy to hear from you. So to just reiterate, green burial is becoming more readily available. But we can't emphasize enough how important it is to let it be known your wishes, because this is something that's still not mainstream. And, you know, once you're dead, if you haven't let your wishes be known in advance, you are not going to have any choices about what people do with you. So what we suggest is, number one, write down your wishes for a green funeral, including where you want to be buried, that you do not want to be embalmed, and what, if anything, you would like to be buried in. Secondly, make arrangements with a funeral home in advance. This will also help you ensure that you've secured a funeral home that will facilitate your wish for a green burial. More and more funeral homes are familiar with this practice and will do it, but not everyone is doing that yet. Number three, choose a cemetery that offers natural burials and whose practices align with your level of sustainability. Number four, make sure you share your plans with your loved ones, your executor, and/or your attorney. And number five, for additional resources, see the Green Burial Council website, which has a lot of resources that Terry and I, articles, all kinds of things. They give you a list of all the green burial certified cemeteries in the United States. There are probably, I know that there are cemeteries that may not be certified by them at this point, but it's a really good list to start with at any rate.
Okay, now we're getting into the resources that helped us prepare this program. Here's one book. It's called Our Last Best Act, Planning for the End of Our Lives. And it's very recent and does cover green burial. And there's the Green Burial Guidebook. And then there's this whole list, 2 pages of resources. And these will be on the 350.org website. So we don't need to tell you about all of that. And so let's open it up for discussion, questions, comments. Remember, we're not experts, so we may have to get back to you with answers.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I did mention that we recently found out, but we need to do more research on. And this came from an article that was on the Green Burial website, that many people who are cremated have been scattering ashes of their relatives, or they wish to have their ashes scattered in various places themselves. And what this article indicated was the scattering of cremated remains is actually toxic to the environment. And, yeah, I can read what it actually says in their Q&A or whatever, but Terry and I need to do a little bit more research on why that is. And it astonished both of us, because I know that's been a practice of a number of people I know. And yeah, that kind of surprised me. So anyway, questions, comments?
So what questions do you have for us?
We should comment that if you want to ask a question, go under participants and
Under reaction.
reactions.
Under reactions.
Raise your hand.
You know, prior to tonight, my wife showed me this article just out of the blue about the human composting, and it was in the most recent New York Times.
Yes.
Yeah, a week ago, it was in the Times.
No,
Right.
yes. We both.
or the New Yorker. I can't quite remember.
I'm
But
sorry.
when I did another search for the New Yorker, there's a number of articles about human composting. So that was kind of curious, but yeah, it's not available in Wisconsin. Like I think like 4 states: Colorado, Washington, and maybe New York. And that I can see
No,
where New
I
York
think-
was.
I think it's the 3 states on the West Coast, Vermont and Colorado.
Yeah, they said it's really good for New York because in the city of New York, there's no land.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's one of the issues that we mentioned. Their cities are
So-
out of space.
Yeah, yeah. So when they compost you, you're given basically a square yard of a mixture of bone and whatever they threw in, the wood chips, the compost, and you can
Yeah.
put it where you want, I guess.
Straw.
Right.
So that was curious. That was curious. Let me ask you a question about Forest Home Cemetery. So when they bury you with the natural burial, you have this little spot 1 foot by or 2 foot by 6 foot.
Yeah, I don't know what the exact dimensions are. It's in their prairie rest.
Okay,
It's in a separate area of the
right,
cemetery.
right. But it's not a mass grave. You have a spot.
Yeah,
Yes.
you have a spot.
And then if anyone wants to visit you, I guess you could say you got your name on the rock if you want
Yeah.
do they give you like,
They give you
GPS
GPS coordinates, yes. I've got their brochure right here in front of me. Yes.
Okay.
Traditional maps will be maintained in the tradition method through locating a grave in a prairie may be a challenge. So Prairie Rest will also provide a global positioning system.
yeah,
GPS device at no charge to those who wish a precise location. The Prairie Rest GPS will be available to guests 24 years and older with a credit card acting as security deposit and available at and during the office hours of Forest Home Cemetery.
yeah. So in the pictures, it looks like it was a maintained grass that would, it isn't like it isn't like a prairie that they let go with prairie plants and stuff like that. It's a maintained area with mowers and with grass. Is that right?
I'm not totally sure. My husband and I visited in the winter, so there wasn't much life on the area. And I visited it this summer for a funeral, and it looked like it had been recently mowed, perhaps for the occasion of the funeral. So I'm not entirely sure what it's like.
Okay.
So I think from reading their brochure and talking to somebody there, they are trying to get it back to native plants.
Mhm.
But they have to, I think, get rid of some of the invasives first, but their intention is to have it be a prairie. And I believe some trees were planted there recently as well. I think I remember reading that. But yeah, I think their intention is to have it be more of a natural prairie.
So there is some maintenance involved with lawnmowers and trimming and stuff like that. Because the picture I saw looked like it was a nice area of cut grass. Maybe the turf grass is maybe 2 or 3 inches tall. It looked well maintained.
And I don't know what they use for machinery.
Okay.
I just wanted to share one more thing. It's nice to be back at the meeting. I often miss it on Zoom, but Tim catches me up. Thanks for the presentation tonight. We're just finishing our wills, and we're very, very much involved in setting this up for our kids now.
Great.
Tim and I are both following his parents' protocol that they used when they died, and we are signed up to donate our bodies to UW Hospital in Madison. And they come and they get the body from the hospital or the home or wherever, free of charge. They take it back, they use it in the School of Medicine for whatever purposes they deem, and they can use donated body parts or whatever they need. And at the end of that, the only thing that's disturbing to me is at the end of that, they have a mass cremation, and this cremation thing is still affecting the environment so much, still bothers me. But at least it's a massive thing. And there are other hospitals in the area that also do that. If you want to make your body do even more good before it's put into the ground in one form or another, that's another way to go.
So I can speak a little bit to that because both of my parents donated their bodies to the Medical College of Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And we said that we wanted as a family to receive the ashes. They'd have to cremate the bodies when they're done. Unfortunately, I wish we could persuade the medical colleges to at least use as it becomes more into, but you would think they have the money to do it. Apparently, one of the reasons why there's not more water, alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation yet is because the equipment to do so is quite costly to set up, but you would think medical colleges might have that kind of money. Anyway,
If they
so
do mass cremations, does that
no, they
lessen the
did not.
impact?
I mean, they must have cremated them separately because we got at their ashes back of both of them clearly labeled with their.
I
and
think
we
in
are not
Madison,
going
you
to
can
pay
make that
those.
request and then they have to do it. You also can say, yeah, put us in with the
Yeah.
rest of the bodies. And we never got Kim's parents' ashes back.
Oh, so we did get both of my parents' ashes
Yeah.
back.
And then they have a service every year for everybody who's donated
Oh,
their body.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
they did. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful
Yeah.
service.
Yeah, it's a nice thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all that you have.
Okay, let's get back to protocol. We've got a couple people on the stack. If you have questions, would like to make a comment, please go down to the reactions button and raise your hands. Jan, you're at the top of the stack.
Yes, thanks for your presentation tonight. I saw reference to cremation and growing a tree. How does that work? Your ashes are nourish the growth of a tree, or what? I like the idea of having a
Yeah,
tree.
the ashes can be spread around a tree, and I believe there are also companies that specifically make the tree out of your ashes. I'm not sure what the process is. If it's anything local.
Okay.
Okay, Charlie, you're next up.
Yeah, you haven't spoken about costs. What are the costs for green burial?
Well, they can vary just like for traditional burial. We haven't actually, Terry, maybe you have current figures for what a plot would cost at either of the local places. I'm not sure.
No,
I want to say around 3,000 to 5,000.
think they may charge the same for a plot as they do for a traditional burial.
But then your other costs are dependent upon, so are you going to choose a shroud? Are you going to choose any one of those caskets? You can, the willow, all of them have different price ranges. So there you are, you can keep it really cheap. I think a shroud is probably the cheapest, and then you can go up from there. So again, just like picking traditional caskets where you can have a pine box all the way up to, the precious woods or metals, expensive metals with all the liners and all that kind of stuff. So there's a range.
Sure. So you don't know what the Prairie Rest home, is that what's called, Prairie Rest, would charge for a space out there?
I
No.
don't.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been some time since Bruce and I were there, so our figures. Are there any costs in the brochure listed in the brochure, Katie?
No, and I suspect because cost can
Change.
change.
Very,
Just like
yeah.
everything else.
Okay, well, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Paula, you're next up on the queue.
My husband and I actually went to Forest Home Cemetery a couple of months ago and toured the part of the cemetery that has the green burial. Something that was brought up earlier about like how do they maintain the grounds. They actually brought in like 40 goats and the goats trimmed the weeds and the grass and everything like that. So that's how they took care of that area. And I think the pricing for both of us was somewhere, and it was for both of us, it was going to be around $10,000 for the plot and whatever else Forest Home has to do. And I don't know if that included getting your name engraved on the big granite rocks, because they did have, I forget, there were probably about 6 rocks, but not all of them had names engraved on them. So I don't know if that was included in the price, but yeah, it was, they showed pictures of the goats taking care of the area. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Sharon?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I heard somebody was looking at spaces and they said you have to be on a waiting list. Is that true? Because they don't have enough spaces for, I don't know.
I don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know, but certainly that would be good incentive for pushing some of the other cemeteries to create natural burial areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure that would vary by cemetery too.
My theory is that the atoms I'm using now, I want to put them to some good use. Now, it sounds like most of these is just putting them in the ground for a lot of money. Is there my goal is to dig a little hole and put my ashes in and plant a tree right on me, so my ashes will go into like an oak tree, is kind of the direction what I would like to have these atoms go for. So the question is, scattering ashes on the water or that kind of thing, is that kind of where is the powers that be on that kind of issue?
So I am going to read from you the article that I found that is, I believe, on the Green Burial site, but it says offering green burial options in your hybrid cemetery. And at the end of that article are 6 pages of questions and answers. So I'm going to read what it says about scattering ashes. So in addition to the process, cremated remains disposal poses significant threats to the environment. Cremated remains consist of calcium phosphate and sodium and are heavy, apt to smother foliage on the surface. Underground cremated remains create what is essentially a nutrient-deficient salt lick that has no environmental benefits. Cremated remains that are scattered on vegetation will likely have a detrimental effect on the soil and surrounding microenvironment and may contribute to phosphorus runoff that can create algae bloom in waterways that kills fish, marine life, and water plants.
Okay, will you put that on the chat or the site so that we can go look at those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think, did we put that in our resource list, Terry, that article?
We put the Green Burial Council website on, yeah, and that's what.
This is on the Green Burial website, and it's called Offering Green Burial Options in Your Hybrid Cemetery. So it's a great article to bring to cemeteries that are not hybrid to try and push them in that direction.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the website is called Green Burial?
The Green Burial Council.
Council. Okay, thank you.
And this is again a Q&A from that article that's on that website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was the thing that just astonished Terry and I when we read it. It was like, what?
Charlie, you're back up.
So has anyone calculated how many trees would have to be planted to make up for the cremation?
I have no idea.
We need to know how many tons of CO2 gets emitted. I guess we could calculate that if we knew the number of therms involved
Terry, didn't
in the
you say that?
cremation.
I think
How
I said,
many tons?
I think I said something like 600 pounds
Per
Six-
body.
per body.
600 pounds. Well, usually natural gas is rated by therms. So you
Okay.
need to find out how many therms got used.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, it could be a lot of trees.
Could be a lot of trees.
Yeah.
And one of the issues now is that so many more people, and especially since the pandemic, that so many more people were being cremated, that it was just increasing the amount of CO2 emissions. And it
Wow.
continues to increase worldwide. And of course, the other greater issue even than that, well, it's a double whammy for those in marginalized communities, because that's where crematories often are located, and they lifted the regulations during the pandemic so that they could burn more bodies. And so those communities were impacted even more so than they already were.
So do we know that if you buried tons of bodies in a prairie area, would the prairie do better with the bodies in there than without the bodies? I mean, this would be a great way to restore prairies in Wisconsin, it seems
Yeah, it
to
would
me.
be, it would be.
Yeah.
And to protect the land, it can't be developed once it's a burial place.
Right,
You know,
right.
this
It's
is
a
the way
terrific
we
idea.
always buried our dead. Our dead for, you know, up until the Civil War, this is the way people were buried.
It also created a big arsenic problem because arsenic was used a lot in the embalming, and that got
Yeah.
into water supplies.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, and I think I took a walk several years ago through a cemetery in Boston. It was really interesting because the graves were really small, because I think the people were shorter, smaller back then. So they had small graves.
Well, you could bury them vertically. That would save space.
That's true. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Mhm.
But it's, you know, I was thinking, because one of the things we talked about is natural burial. Really, grave robbing hasn't been an issue for many years, like for a century or more. But people are still concerned about grave robbing. And then I started to think, well, boy, with the shortage of natural resources, what if people start digging up graves to get at the metal that the caskets are made out of? Is
Right.
that a possibility? I mean, it doesn't seem so far-fetched to me, because these are natural resources that we're burying that could be used for other things. So I don't know. Maybe grave robbing has not seen its last days.
So don't put anything valuable on the corpse, right? And just bury the body in a shroud, and there's nothing to steal at that point.
There you go.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about your grave being robbed.
Yes, exactly.
Well, the reason that grave robbery used to happen a century ago was that there weren't the donations of bodies to medical schools. So people robbed graves so that they could sell the bodies to the for medical use.
All right.
But now we're so kind, we donate them.
Well, thanks much for the presentation. It's been enlightening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, you want to close?
Yeah, thank you, Katie and Terry. So if there are no other announcements or anything, we can talk for a minute about the next meeting. Greg, what's online for our January meeting?
Pat Sumnick was with us for a minute, but for a while. Looks like she's left. Pat Sumnick has identified a film called The Minimalists, Less Is Now, and talked to Netflix and gotten permission for us to broadcast that or use that during our meeting. And so on January 10th, we're going to start by watching that video and then have a discussion about the idea of minimizing material things in our lives and
Yes, take it
reaching that goal.
Yes, I keep the consumer mentality. I remember a bumper sticker I always loved was live simply so others can simply live. And I think it's a very profound thought. And so we need to delve more into that if we're truly environmentalists and concerned about the use of our resources. How many of them are really we consuming that we don't need to, and how can we find really more peace and happiness with less possessions?
Yeah.
So,
You know,
thank you.
another word for that is sustainability.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that should be a very interesting program next time. I hope that you will join us. And that'll be the second Tuesday in January, right?
Next year.
Next year. See you next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See you all next year. Yeah, we wish you all very happy holidays and safe times and good health and well-being. And Happy New Year.
Okay.
All right. Happy New
Ditto
Year.
that. Okay.
Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.